Thomas Mitchell stared at the shattered picture frame on the hardwood floor, glass splinters reflecting the fading afternoon light that streamed through the living room windows. The family portrait, himself, his wife Diane, their daughter Emma, and son Jack, lay among the debris, a captured moment of happiness that now seemed like it belonged to someone else's life. In the kitchen, Diane was still shouting, her words sharp enough to cut through walls. 23 years, Tom. 23 years, and this is how you treat us? How you treat me? Thomas remained silent, his jaw clenched so tight it hurt. The argument had started over something trivial. He'd forgotten about Jack's basketball championship tonight, but had quickly spiraled into an excavation of every buried grievance and disappointment of their marriage. Are you even listening to me? Diane appeared in the doorway, her normally warm brown eyes narrowed with fury, her dark hair falling out of its usual neat ponytail. At 52, she still had the fierce energy that had attracted him when they met at Boston University all those years ago. I heard every word, Thomas said quietly, and I said I was sorry about the game. Work has been work. Always work. Diane laughed, but it was a hollow sound. The Mitchell Group won't collapse if you take 2 hours to watch your son play basketball. Thomas ran a hand through his graying hair. The family construction business had been struggling for months, but he'd kept the severity of it from Diane. The Rosewood Heights project, a luxury apartment complex that should have been their biggest success, was hemorrhaging money after the discovery of structural issues. Contractors were threatening to walk, investors were nervous, and Thomas had spent the afternoon in emergency meetings trying to save the project and the company his father had built. I'm doing my best, he said, hating the defensive tone in his voice. Your best for the company, maybe. Not for us. Diane gestured around their spacious Newton home. What's the point of all this if we're miserable? If our kids barely know their father? The front door opened before Thomas could respond. Emma walked in, her college textbooks clutched to her chest, 20-year-old face immediately registering the tension. Her eyes fell to the broken frame. What happened? She asked cautiously, setting her books down. Ask your father, Diane said, turning away. He's an expert at breaking things. Emma looked between them, her shoulders hunching slightly as if trying to make herself smaller. Is this about Jack's game? Because I can just drive him. This is about a lot more than a basketball game. Thomas said, suddenly exhausted. Your mother thinks I'm a failure as a husband and father. I never said, you didn't have to. Emma's phone buzzed, and she glanced down at it with obvious relief. It's Jack. He's wondering if anyone's coming to see him play. The unspoken accusation hung in the air. Tell him I'll be there, Diane said firmly. Front row. Thomas felt their eyes on him, waiting. The pressure of the failing project, the board meeting tomorrow, the emails he still needed to answer. It all pressed down on him. I can't, he finally said. I have to finish reviewing the Rosewood contracts tonight. Diane's face hardened. Of course you do. She grabbed her car keys from the counter. Emma, are you coming with me? Emma hesitated, looking at her father with a mixture of disappointment and sympathy. I'll meet you there. I just need to change first. After Diane left, the house fell into a heavy silence. Emma knelt to pick up the larger pieces of glass while Thomas stood frozen, watching his daughter clean up the mess he'd caused, literally and figuratively. Dad, Emma said after a minute, what's really going on? Mom seems really upset, and you seem, I don't know, distant. Thomas sank onto the couch. Should he tell her? About the company's financial troubles? About the fights that had been increasing in frequency over the past months? About his growing fear that he was watching his family and his father's legacy crumble simultaneously? It's complicated, Em, was all he managed. Emma placed the broken frame on the coffee table. That's what adults always say when they don't want to explain things to their kids. She stood up, brushing glass fragments from her jeans. I'm 20, Dad. Not 12. The company's in trouble, Thomas admitted, the words feeling like stones in his mouth. Bad trouble. Emma's eyes widened slightly. How bad? If the Rosewood project fails, we might have to file for bankruptcy. Saying it aloud made it more real, more terrifying. I haven't told your mother yet. Or Jack. Why not? Because I'm supposed to be the provider. The steady one. He gestured helplessly. It's what my father was, what his father was. Mom deserves to know, Emma said gently. We all do. We're a family. Thomas shook his head. Your mother already thinks I'm neglecting all of you for work. If she knew the work wasn't even going well. He trailed off, unable to finish the thought. Emma checked her watch. I should get ready for Jack's game. She paused, then added, You should come, Dad. Work will still be there tomorrow. But Thomas knew the board wouldn't wait, the contractors wouldn't wait, the approaching deadlines wouldn't wait. Next time, he promised, the same empty words he'd been offering for years. After Emma went upstairs, Thomas picked up the family photo from among the glass. It had been taken at Cape Cod 3 summers ago, all of them sunburned and smiling. Jack still short enough to be lifted onto Thomas's shoulders. Emma before college had made her so serious, Diane with her arm wrapped firmly around his waist. He carefully slid the photo out of the broken frame, folded it, and placed it in his wallet. Then he returned to his home office, closed the door, and tried to focus on saving what was left of the Mitchell family legacy, while his actual family drove away without him, the distance between them growing with every mile. The Mitchell family kitchen had always been the heart of their home, a warm space filled with conversation and laughter, where homework was completed at the island counter and Sunday pancakes were a sacred tradition. Now, a week after the argument about Jack's basketball game, it felt like neutral territory in an ongoing Cold War. Jack sat at the counter, pushing scrambled eggs around his plate without eating. At 16, he was already taller than Thomas, with the same broad shoulders and dark eyes. Unlike his father, however, he wore his emotions plainly on his face. This morning, it was disappointment tinged with anger. You missed my history presentation yesterday, he said, abruptly when Thomas entered the kitchen. I told Mom to tell you about it. Thomas poured himself coffee, his back to his son. She didn't mention it. The communication breakdown between him and Diane had reached new levels. They moved around each other like ghosts, speaking only when necessary, usually about logistics regarding the kids. Right. Jack stabbed at his eggs. Guess you were busy anyway. Thomas turned, guilt squeezing his chest. I would have been there if I'd known. Sure, Dad. Like you were at my championship game. Jack pushed his plate away and stood up. Doesn't matter. I'm used to it. Thomas watched helplessly as his son grabbed his backpack and left without another word. The front door slammed with enough force to rattle the windows. His phone buzzed with a text from his business partner, Michael Chun. Board meeting moved up to 9 a.m. Not good news. Thomas closed his eyes briefly. The Rosewood situation was deteriorating rapidly. Yesterday, they discovered that the subcontractor had used substandard materials in the foundation, a disaster that would cost millions to fix and delay the project by months, if not longer. The investors were getting nervous. He heard footsteps on the stairs and turned to see Diane enter the kitchen, already dressed for her job as an elementary school art teacher. They made brief eye contact before she headed to the coffee maker. You didn't tell me about Jack's presentation, Thomas said. Diane kept her back to him. He asked me to. I forgot. The lie hung between them. Diane never forgot anything related to the kids. I need to talk to you, Thomas said. About the company. About why I've been so late for dinner. Absent for family events. Emotionally unavailable. Diane turned, coffee mug clutched in her hands like a shield. Take your pick, Tom. It's not that simple. It never is with you. She checked her watch. I have a staff meeting in 30 minutes. Whatever crisis you're having at the Mitchell Group will have to wait. Thomas fought back frustration. This affects all of us, Diane. The company, our finances. Now you want to discuss our finances? Diane's voice took on a dangerous edge. Funny, you didn't consult me when you remortgaged the house. Thomas froze. How did you? The bank called yesterday to confirm some details. Her knuckles whitened around the mug. They seemed surprised when I didn't know anything about it. Almost as surprised as I was. I can explain. I'm sure you can. You've always been good with explanations, Tom. Not so good with honesty. She set her mug down with deliberate care. What else don't I know? What else have you been handling on your own because you're the provider? The contempt in her voice when she said those last words cut deep. The company's in trouble, he admitted. Serious trouble. And you thought remortgaging our home, without telling me, was the solution? Diane shook her head in disbelief. This house is not just your asset, Tom. It's our children's home. It's where we've built our lives. I was trying to protect you from worrying. No, Diane said quietly. You were protecting yourself from having to admit you're struggling. There's a difference. Thomas had no response to that uncomfortable truth. Diane grabbed her bag and car keys. I need to go to work. We'll talk about this tonight. and I expect full disclosure about our financial situation." After she left, Thomas stood alone in the kitchen, the magnitude of his mistakes settling over him. He had violated his wife's trust in the worst way, making unilateral decisions about their shared life and assets. And now, with the Rosewood project imploding, even those desperate measures might not be enough. His phone rang. Michael again. Thomas answered, his voice flat. "I'll be there in 20. "Make it 15, Michael replied grimly. "Patterson's here with the investors. They're talking about pulling out entirely." Thomas ended the call and headed for the door, passing the living room where the empty space on the mantel still marked where the family portrait had stood before it shattered. A fitting metaphor, he thought bitterly. When Thomas returned home that evening, the house was unusually quiet. No music from Emma's room, no sounds of Jack's video games. He found Diane sitting alone at the dining room table, a stack of papers in front of her. "Where are the kids?" he asked, setting down his briefcase. "Emma took Jack to dinner." Diane didn't look up. "I thought we needed privacy for this conversation." Thomas sat across from her, noticing now that the papers were financial statements, bank records, mortgage documents. She'd been doing her homework. "How bad is it?" she asked. Thomas took a deep breath. "The Rosewood project is failing. Construction defects, substandard materials. The costs to fix it will exceed our profit margin by millions. The investors are threatening to pull out. And our personal finances? I've put everything into trying to save the company. Our savings, the home equity line." He couldn't meet her eyes. "My father's company, Diane. My father's legacy. I couldn't just let it collapse." "So you risked our family's security instead," Diane said, her voice remarkably steady. "Without consulting me. Without giving me a choice in the matter. I thought I could fix it before I found out, before it affected us." She looked up at him, her expression more wounded than angry. "We've been married for 23 years, Tom. When exactly were you planning to start seeing me as a partner and not just as someone to be protected and managed?" The question struck at the core of their problems, deeper than money, deeper than missed basketball games. "I don't know how to fix this," Thomas admitted. It was perhaps the most honest thing he'd said in months. "The company? Or us?" "Both." Diane gathered the papers into a neat stack. "The company might be beyond saving, Tom. That's the reality we need to face." She stood up, her movements deliberate. "As for us, that depends on whether you're finally ready to stop carrying everything alone. What do you want me to do?" "I want you to talk to your children. Tonight. Tell them everything. About the company, about our finances. No more secrets, no more protecting them from reality." Thomas nodded slowly. "And then we figure out a plan. Together." She handed him the stack of documents. "For what it's worth, I went through all of this today. I think there might be a way to protect the house, even if the business goes under. But we need legal advice." Thomas stared at her, surprised by her practical approach. "You're not leaving?" "I'm angry, Tom. Hurt. Betrayed." Diane's voice caught slightly. "But 23 years and 2 children mean something. At least to me." "To me too," he said quickly. "Always." "Prove it," she said simply. "Start by being honest with your family. All of us." Thomas heard the front door open, followed by Jack and Emma's voices in the hallway. The moment of truth had arrived sooner than he expected. Diane squeezed his shoulder briefly as she passed. "I'll get them into the living room." Thomas sat alone for a moment, gathering his courage. He had spent his entire adult life trying to be the kind of man his father was, strong, self-sufficient, a protector. But perhaps that model was flawed. Perhaps real strength meant admitting vulnerability, sharing burdens, and trusting his family enough to face reality together. He picked up the papers and followed Diane into the living room, where his children waited with apprehensive expressions. It was time to start rebuilding, not his father's legacy, but his own. Emma Mitchell sat in the university library, staring at her economics textbook without really seeing the words. 3 weeks had passed since her father's confession about the family business, and the aftershocks were still reverberating through their lives. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "Don't forget dinner tonight. 7 p.m. Important family discussion." Family discussions had become a regular occurrence in the Mitchell household. Painful, necessary conversations about money, about the future, about the shifting landscape of their lives. Emma closed her textbook with a sigh. Her father's company was officially in receivership now, the Rosewood project abandoned, and the Mitchell Group's assets frozen while accountants and lawyers sorted through the wreckage. "You look like you're having about as much fun as I am," said a voice from across the table. Emma glanced up to see Ryan Lewis, her study partner for the semester, watching her with concern. His rumpled flannel shirt and perpetually messy brown hair gave him a casual appearance that belied his sharp intelligence. "Just family stuff," Emma said, forcing a smile. "Nothing major." Ryan raised an eyebrow. "You've been saying that for weeks. Either you have the world's most demanding family, or something's seriously wrong." Emma hesitated. She hadn't told anyone at Northeastern about her family's situation. Somehow, keeping it contained felt like the only control she had over the chaos. "My dad's business is failing," she finally admitted. "Construction company. Been in the family for 2 generations." Ryan's expression softened. "That's rough. I'm sorry." "Yeah, well." Emma shrugged, uncomfortable with sympathy. "These things happen, right? Is that why you've been picking up extra shifts at the coffee shop?" Emma nodded. Her part-time job had become nearly full-time as she tried to cover more of her own expenses. Her parents hadn't asked her to do this. In fact, they'd insisted her education remained the priority, but she couldn't bear adding to their financial stress. "If you need help with anything," Ryan began. "I don't need charity," Emma snapped, then immediately regretted her tone. "Sorry. It's fine. We're handling it." Ryan held up his hands in surrender. "Not offering charity. Just friendship." Emma softened slightly. "I know. Thanks." She glanced at her watch. "I should go. Family dinner tonight." "Another fun discussion?" "The funnest," Emma said with grim humor. "Tonight's topic: do I transfer to a state school next semester to save money?" Stay tuned for the thrilling conclusion. Ryan's eyes widened. "Seriously? You'd leave Northeastern?" Emma shoved her books into her bag. "Let's just say all options are on the table right now." She headed out of the library into the crisp October air, trying to prepare herself for the evening ahead. The truth was, she'd already made her decision about school. The question was whether her parents would accept it. Jack Mitchell dribbled the basketball aggressively down the court, weaving through defenders before launching a perfect three-pointer. The ball swished through the net, and his teammates cheered. Coach Alvarez nodded approvingly from the sidelines. "Good work, Mitchell," he called. "Take 5, everyone." Jack grabbed his water bottle and moved to the bleachers, checking his phone. There was a message from his mother about dinner tonight, and one from his father asking if he needed a ride home from practice. He responded to his mother and ignored his father's text. Things were still tense between them. Jack understood the business situation better now. His father had explained everything in painful detail that night 3 weeks ago, but understanding didn't equal forgiveness. His father had gambled with their future, their home, their security. Worse, he'd done it secretly, as though the rest of them couldn't handle the truth. "Your dad coming to the game Friday?" asked Miguel, one of Jack's teammates, dropping onto the bench beside him. "Doubt it," Jack replied, taking a long drink of water. "Still in the doghouse, huh?" Jack shrugged. His father had been making efforts, showing up to his recent games, asking about school, trying to engage. But Jack kept him at arm's length, unwilling to fully trust again. It was easier to maintain the cold distance. "He's trying," Jack admitted reluctantly. "But things are pretty messed up at home right now." Miguel nodded sympathetically. "My parents split up last year. Took a while before my dad and I were cool again." "My parents aren't splitting up," Jack said quickly, then wondered why he felt so defensive about it. His parents weren't exactly affectionate these days, but they presented a united front in family discussions. His mother, especially, seemed determined to keep them functioning as a unit. Coach Alvarez blew his whistle, calling them back to practice. Jack tucked his phone away, glad for the distraction of basketball, the one area of his life that still made perfect sense. Thomas sat in his car outside the high school gym, watching players trickle out after practice. He spotted Jack immediately, laughing with a couple of teammates, looking carefree in a way he rarely did at home anymore. Thomas debated driving away before Jack saw him, giving his son the space he seemed to want. But Diane's words from that morning echoed in his head. "Keep showing up, even when it's uncomfortable. Especially then." He got out of the car and waved. Jack noticed him, said something to his friends, then walked over with obvious reluctance. "Mom said dinner's at 7, Jack said by way of greeting. "I know. Thought I'd save you the bus ride home." Jack glanced at his friends, who were watching curiously. "You didn't need to. I could have gotten a ride with Miguel." I wanted to, Thomas said simply. After a moment's hesitation, Jack shrugged and tossed his gym bag in the back seat. The first few minutes of the drive passed in awkward silence. Thomas had spent decades in business negotiations, yet somehow couldn't find the right words to bridge the gap with his teenage son. How was practice? He finally asked. Fine. Coach said anything about college scouts yet? Jack shifted in his seat. There was a guy from UMass at last week's game. That's great, Thomas said, genuinely pleased. Did he talk to you? Brief conversation. Nothing major. Jack stared out the window. Doesn't matter anyway. We can't afford college now, right? The bitterness in his voice hit Thomas like a physical blow. Jack, whatever happens with the business, with our finances, your education is non-negotiable. We'll figure it out. Like you figured out the company. As soon as the words left his mouth, Jack looked like he regretted them. Sorry, that was fair, Thomas interrupted. I messed up, Jack. In multiple ways. I'm not denying that. Jack picked at a loose thread on his jacket. Are we going to lose the house? The question caught Thomas off guard. We're doing everything possible to prevent that. That's not an answer. Thomas sighed. No, it's not. The truth is, I don't know yet. The lawyers are working on it. But, he paused, reminding himself of his promise to be honest. It's a possibility we need to be prepared for. Jack nodded, absorbing this. That's what tonight's family meeting is about. Partly. And about Emma's school situation. She's going to transfer, isn't she? Jack's voice was quiet. She thinks we don't know she's been looking at state schools. Thomas felt a surge of sadness at how mature his children had been forced to become in the face of his failures. She's mentioned it as an option. I could get a job, Jack offered suddenly. After school, weekends. Help out with expenses. Thomas reached over and squeezed his son's shoulder. Your job is to be a student and a basketball player. That's it. They pulled into the driveway of the house that might not be theirs much longer. Jack grabbed his bag, but didn't immediately get out. Dad, he said hesitantly. Whatever happens, we'll be okay, right? As a family. The question contained so much vulnerability that Thomas had to take a moment before answering. Yes, he said finally, with more conviction than he'd felt about anything in months. That's the one thing I'm certain of. Jack nodded and headed inside, leaving Thomas to sit alone for a moment, gathering himself for the evening ahead. When he entered the house, Diane was in the kitchen, putting the finishing touches on dinner. She looked up as he entered, her expression a complex mix of emotions he couldn't fully read. Emma called, she said. She's on her way. Thomas nodded, moving to help her with the salad. They worked side by side in a silence that was neither completely comfortable nor entirely tense. A new normal they were still figuring out. I picked Jack up from practice, he said after a while. Diane glanced at him. How did that go? He's worried about the house. About Emma. About everything. They're good kids, Diane said softly. Better than we deserve, maybe. Thomas looked at his wife, really looked at her, for what felt like the first time in years. The strain of recent weeks showed in the new lines around her eyes, in the tight set of her shoulders. Yet she kept going, holding their family together when he'd nearly torn it apart. I'm sorry, he said, the words inadequate but necessary. For all of it. Diane's hands stilled on the cutting board. I know you are. She met his gaze directly. The question is what we do next. All of us, together. Thomas heard the front door open as Emma arrived, followed by Jack coming downstairs. Their children's voices mingled in the hallway, discussing something, arguing mildly, living their normal lives within the abnormal situation he'd created. We start over, Thomas said firmly. From wherever we are, we start over. Diane nodded, and there was the faintest hint of her old smile. Not forgiveness, not yet, but perhaps the beginning of a path toward it. Dinner's ready, she called to the kids, and the Mitchell family gathered around the table to face whatever came next. November arrived with bitter winds and the first dusting of snow across Newton. In the 6 weeks since Thomas's company had entered receivership, the Mitchell family had been forced to adjust to a cascading series of new realities. The most immediate was Emma's decision, announced during that family dinner, to transfer to UMass Boston for the spring semester. Despite Thomas and Diane's protests, she had submitted the paperwork the very next day. It makes financial sense, she'd insisted. And their business program is good. I can live at home and save on housing costs. Today, Emma was packing up her dorm room at Northeastern, sorting through the accumulated possessions of her first 3 semesters of college. Thomas stood awkwardly in the doorway, holding a stack of flattened moving boxes. "You really don't have to help," Emma said, not looking up from the textbooks she was organizing. "I've got it under control." "I wanted to," Thomas replied, setting down the boxes. The small dorm room felt even smaller with the tension between them. "Besides, your mother's showing the house to another realtor this afternoon." Emma's hand stilled. "Another one? That's the 3rd this month." The decision to sell the house had been made 2 weeks ago, after their lawyer confirmed what Thomas had feared. There was no way to keep the property while settling the company's mounting debts. The Mitchell Group's bankruptcy proceedings had revealed the full extent of the financial damage, far worse than even Thomas had realized. "This one specializes in quick sales," Thomas explained, picking up a framed photo of Emma at her high school graduation. "We need to move fast before the bank forces a foreclosure." Emma took the frame from him, carefully wrapping it in newspaper. "Have you guys found an apartment yet?" "We're looking at a place in Waltham tomorrow. 3 bedrooms, close to the commuter rail." Thomas tried to sound upbeat. "It's actually quite nice." "Waltham's not Newton," Emma said quietly. "No, it's not." They worked in silence for a while, Emma methodically packing her belongings while Thomas moved the full boxes to his car. On his 3rd trip back to the room, he found Emma sitting on her stripped bed, holding a Boston University sweatshirt, his alma mater, passed down to her when she was in high school. "Remember when I wanted to go to BU because it was where you went?" she asked, folding the sweatshirt carefully. "I thought following in your footsteps was the most important thing in the world." Thomas sat beside her, the bed frame creaking under their combined weight. "You chose Northeastern because it was right for you. That's what matters. And now I'm choosing UMass because we can't afford anything else." There was no accusation in her voice, just a sad acceptance. "Funny how things change. Emma, I know I've said this before, but I am truly sorry for how my decisions have affected your education, your future." "Dad, stop." Emma held up a hand. "We've been through this multiple times. I'm not angry anymore." "You're not." She shrugged. "What's the point? Being angry doesn't change anything. Doesn't get me back to Northeastern. Doesn't save our house." She stood, returning to her packing. "Besides, it's not like you wanted any of this to happen." Thomas was struck by his daughter's maturity and her resignation. In some ways, her calm acceptance was more painful than Jack's ongoing anger. At least anger showed that Jack still believed things could have been different, that Thomas's choices mattered. Emma's pragmatism suggested she'd already moved beyond blame to simply dealing with their new reality. "I wanted better for you," Thomas said softly. "For all of us." Emma gave him a small, sad smile. "I know, Dad. But this is what we've got now." They finished packing in companionable silence. As they carried the last boxes to the car, Emma's roommate Lily arrived with Ryan, the study partner Thomas had heard about but never met. Introductions were made, and Thomas noticed the protective way Ryan stood slightly in front of Emma, as if shielding her from some invisible threat. "We were going to grab coffee before the drive back," Emma told Thomas. "Want to join us?" The invitation surprised him. "I don't want to intrude." "It's just coffee, Dad," Emma said, rolling her eyes with a flash of her old spirit. "Not a marriage proposal." Over coffee at a small cafe near campus, Thomas watched his daughter interact with her friends. She was different here, more animated, more relaxed than she had been at home recently. Ryan made her laugh with stories about their eccentric economics professor, and Lily reminisced about their disastrous attempt to cook Thanksgiving dinner in the dorm kitchen last year. "Your dad's being a good sport about the move," Lily remarked to Emma. "My parents would have hired movers and then complained about the cost for months." Emma glanced at Thomas. "Yeah, well, we're kind of figuring things out as we go these days." "Speaking of which," Ryan interjected, "I was thinking about that summer internship program we talked about, the one at Mercer Financial. Applications are due next week." Emma's expression closed slightly. "I'm not sure that's realistic anymore. The program doesn't pay, and I need to find a paying job for the summer." "Actually," Ryan continued, "I talked to my uncle. He's on their board, and they've added 2 paid positions this year. Competitive, obviously, but with your GPA and background." Thomas watched a spark of hope flicker across his daughter's face before she tamped it down. "I'll think about it," she said carefully. After saying goodbye to Emma's friends, they drove back to Newton largely in silence, the car filled with boxes containing the physical evidence of Emma's interrupted college experience. As they pulled into the driveway, Thomas noticed a for sale sign had been planted in their front yard. Stark, white, final. Emma stared at it for a long moment. That makes it real, doesn't it? Inside, they found Diane at the kitchen table with a spreadsheet open on her laptop and papers spread around her. She looked up with a tired smile as they entered. "How did it go?" she asked. "All packed up," Emma replied, grabbing a bottle of water from the refrigerator. "Where's Jack?" "At Miguel's. Staying for dinner." Diane closed her laptop. "The realtor thinks we should list below market value for a quick sale. She's confident it will still create a bidding situation, given the neighborhood." Thomas nodded, unable to look at the walls that had surrounded their family for 18 years, walls that would soon belong to strangers. "I'm going to start unpacking," Emma said, sensing the heaviness of the moment. She kissed her mother's cheek before heading upstairs. When she was gone, Diane let out a long breath. "Did she seem okay?" "Resigned," Thomas answered honestly. "More so than I expected." "She gets that from you." Diane began gathering her papers into a neat stack. The ability to face reality head-on, however painful. Thomas wasn't sure if it was a compliment or a criticism. Their relationship had evolved into something new in recent weeks. Not the easy companionship of before, nor the angry distance immediately after his confession. They were partners in crisis management now, efficient and respectful, but with an emotional guardedness that left Thomas aching for what they'd lost. "We need to talk about Jack," Diane said, changing the subject. "His coach called today, said he's been distracted, missing practices." Thomas frowned. "That's not like him. None of this is like any of us." Diane rubbed her temples, a gesture that had become familiar lately. "But basketball is his ticket to college now. He can't afford to lose focus." The unspoken weight of their financial situation hung between them. Without Thomas's income or the substantial college fund that had been liquidated to pay creditors, athletic scholarships had become Jack's best hope for higher education. "I'll talk to him," Thomas promised, though he wasn't sure how effective that would be, given Jack's continuing coolness toward him. Diane nodded, then hesitated before adding, "I got a call back about that teaching position at Watertown Elementary." Thomas looked up sharply. "The full-time one. They want me to come in for a second interview." A small, cautious smile appeared on her face. It would mean quitting at Newton, but the salary increase would help considerably with the apartment rent. "That's great news," Thomas said sincerely, genuinely pleased for her. Diane had been working part-time for years, prioritizing flexibility for their family over career advancement. Now, like Emma, she was making practical choices for their new reality. "Nothing's certain yet," she cautioned, "but it feels good to have options." Outside, the early darkness of November had settled over their neighborhood. Inside, in their home that would not be theirs much longer, Thomas and Diane sat together in the growing shadows, not touching but not apart, bound by the shared challenge of rebuilding what they could from the pieces of their former life. The apartment in Waltham was nothing like their house in Newton. Dark, narrow hallways replaced open, sunlit spaces. Thin walls transmitted the neighbors' arguments and television shows. The kitchen was barely large enough for two people to stand in comfortably, but it was theirs, at least for the 12-month lease they had signed 3 days after accepting an offer on their house. It was Christmas Eve, their first in the new place. Diane had done her best with decorations, hanging lights along the small living room window and setting up a modest tree in the corner. Thomas watched from the kitchen doorway as she adjusted the star on top, her movements precise and determined, the way they had been since the move. "Need any help?" he asked, feeling useless as he had so often in recent months. "I think I've got it," Diane replied, stepping back to examine her work. "Though I can't find the box with Jack's childhood ornaments. He was asking about them earlier. I think they're still in the storage unit. I can go look tomorrow." Diane nodded absently, her attention already shifting to the next task on her mental list. She had taken the full-time position at Watertown Elementary, which meant longer hours and new responsibilities. Combined with the stress of the move and the ongoing legal complications from the Mitchell Group's bankruptcy, she moved through each day with an efficiency that left little room for reflection or connection. "How was work today?" Thomas ventured, trying to bridge the growing silence between them. "Fine." The kids were excited about the holiday party. She checked her watch. "Is Emma picking Jack up from practice?" "Yes, she texted a few minutes ago." They should be here soon. Thomas wanted to say more, to acknowledge that this Christmas would be different, that he understood her exhaustion, that he missed the easy conversations they used to have. But before he could find the words, Diane's phone rang. She glanced at the screen and frowned. "It's the bankruptcy trustee," she said. On Christmas Eve, she took the call in their bedroom, closing the door behind her. Thomas remained in the living room, staring at the modest tree with its mismatched ornaments. Most of their holiday decorations had been sold along with other non-essential belongings before the move. What remained were the pieces with the most sentimental value: the clay handprint Jack had made in kindergarten, the delicate glass ball that had been a wedding gift from Diane's parents, the wooden star Emma had carved in 7th grade shop class. The apartment door opened, bringing with it a gust of cold air and the sound of his children's voices. Emma entered first, her cheeks flushed from the cold, followed by Jack, still in his basketball clothes. "It's freezing out there," Emma announced, unwinding her scarf. "And the parking situation in this building is ridiculous. I had to circle the block 3 times. "Where's Mom?" Jack asked, dropping his gym bag by the door, a habit Diane had been trying to break since the move, with limited success. "On a call," Thomas replied. "Work stuff." Jack's expression darkened slightly. At 17, he had grown even taller in recent months, his frame filling out with muscle from basketball training. But his eyes, Thomas's eyes, still held the wariness that had become a fixture since their financial collapse. "On Christmas Eve?" he asked skeptically. Thomas shrugged, unwilling to explain the complications of bankruptcy proceedings to his son yet again. "Should be quick. How was practice?" "Fine," Jack replied automatically, heading for the kitchen. His one-word answers had become the norm when speaking to Thomas. Emma caught Thomas's eye and gave a small, sympathetic smile before following her brother. Thomas heard them talking quietly in the kitchen, Jack's voice animated in a way it rarely was with him anymore. Diane emerged from the bedroom, her expression tense. "What did they want?" Thomas asked. "They're considering extending the investigation period." She kept her voice low, glancing toward the kitchen where the kids were still talking. "Something about discrepancies in the accounting from 2022. Thomas felt a familiar knot of anxiety tighten in his chest. The independent audit cleared all that months ago. Well, apparently someone's raised new questions. Diane's tone was carefully neutral, but Thomas heard the unspoken question beneath it. "What else don't I know?" "It's a mistake," he insisted. "Or a delay tactic from one of the creditors." "Nothing more." Diane held his gaze for a long moment before nodding. "I hope you're right." She moved toward the kitchen, plastering on a smile. "Emma, Jack, I didn't hear you come in." Thomas remained in the living room, the trustee's phone call replaying in his mind. The bankruptcy process had been grueling. Every financial decision he'd made over the past 5 years scrutinized, every asset cataloged and evaluated. He had nothing to hide, but the implication that there might be discrepancies sent a chill through him. They had lost so much already. The thought of further investigation, more legal fees, more uncertainty was almost unbearable. The evening progressed with a forced cheerfulness that fooled no one. They ate the lasagna Diane had prepared, a Christmas Eve tradition maintained despite everything else that had changed, and watched a holiday movie on the small television they'd kept after selling most of their electronics. Jack remained withdrawn, responding to questions with minimal effort. Emma tried to compensate with exaggerated enthusiasm about her upcoming final semester at Northeastern and her internship application. "Ryan thinks I have a good shot at the paid position," she said, twirling pasta around her fork. His uncle put in a good word, though he said ultimately it comes down to the application and interview. "That's wonderful, honey," Diane replied warmly. "When will you hear?" "Not until February, probably. But if I get it, it would look amazing on my resume, and the stipend would help with tuition next year." Thomas noticed Jack's expression darken further at the mention of tuition. His son's basketball season had been inconsistent so far, flashes of brilliance undermined by periods of distraction and frustration. Coach Alvarez had been patient, but the college scouts had begun to look elsewhere. After dinner, as Emma and Diane cleared the table, Jack disappeared into the small bedroom he now shared with Emma when she was home from college, a significant downgrade from the spacious rooms they'd each had in Newton. Thomas followed, knocking lightly on the partially open door. "Can I come in?" Jack was sitting on his bed, scrolling through his phone. He didn't look up, but shrugged, his universal signal for reluctant permission. Thomas entered and sat on Emma's bed. Across from him. "Everything okay?" Thomas asked. "You've been quiet tonight." "It's fine, Jack," Thomas said gently. "I know this isn't the Christmas you wanted. That none of this is what you wanted. But we're trying our best to—" "I got cut from the starting lineup," Jack interrupted, finally looking up from his phone. His eyes were red-rimmed with the effort of holding back tears. "Coach told me after practice today." Thomas felt his stomach drop. "What? What?" "Because I've been playing like garbage." Jack's voice was flat. His words, not mine. "That doesn't make sense. You've been the team's top scorer all season. Until the last 3 games. Jack tossed his phone aside. "I missed practices when we were moving. I've been late because the bus from here takes forever to get to Newton. And I can't focus anymore." The raw pain in his son's voice hit Thomas like a physical blow. Basketball had been Jack's constant, his passion, his future. And now that, too, was being affected by the fallout from Thomas's failures. "Coach says I can earn my spot back, but—" Jack trailed off, staring at the ceiling. "The UMass scout was at our last game. Saw me play my worst game ever. You'll get another chance," Thomas said, trying to sound confident. "We'll figure out the transportation issues. I can drive you to early practices before my job interviews." Jack laughed, a short, bitter sound. "Right? Because that's worked out so well before." The accusation hung in the air between them. All the missed games, the broken promises from before, when Thomas had prioritized the failing company over his son's needs. "This time is different," Thomas insisted. "I'm different." Jack met his father's eyes, challenge and hurt mingling in his expression. "Prove it." Before Thomas could respond, Emma appeared in the doorway. "Mom says it's time for the Christmas Eve toast." She looked between them, sensing the tension. "Everything okay in here?" "Fine," Jack said, standing abruptly. "Let's get this over with." In the living room, Diane had poured sparkling cider into the 4 wine glasses they'd kept from their previous life. It was another tradition, a toast on Christmas Eve to the year ahead, usually filled with optimism and plans. "Should I go first?" Diane asked, looking around at their small circle. No one immediately volunteered, the weight of the past year making the usual hopeful sentiments feel hollow. "I will," Emma finally said, raising her glass. "To new beginnings. They might not be the ones we chose, but they're ours to make the best of." Thomas watched his daughter, so much stronger than he had given her credit for, and felt a surge of pride mixed with regret. "To family," Diane added softly. "The one thing that matters most." They all turned to Jack, who hesitated before lifting his glass slightly. "To no more surprises," he said, a slight edge to his voice. "Good or bad." Finally, it was Thomas's turn. He looked at the 3 faces watching him. His wife's carefully composed expression, his daughter's encouraging smile, his son's challenging stare, and knew that whatever words he chose would be inadequate. "To second chances," he said finally, "and to earning back what really matters." They clinked glasses in silence, each lost in their own thoughts about the year behind and the uncertain one ahead. As they sipped the cider, a pale substitute for the champagne they would have had in better times, the neighbor's television blared through the thin wall, an intrusion that would have been unthinkable in their old home. Diane set down her glass with a decisive click. "Let's open one present each tonight," she suggested brightly. "Another tradition we can keep." As she distributed the modest gifts from under the tree, Thomas caught Jack watching him, the challenge still evident in his eyes. "Prove it." It wasn't just about driving to basketball practice. It was about everything: rebuilding trust, keeping promises, being the father his children needed in this new, reduced version of their lives. Thomas nodded slightly, accepting the challenge. Somewhere in the midst of losing everything he had worked for, he had nearly lost something far more precious. This Christmas, stripped of all the material trappings that had once seemed important, made that truth unavoidably clear. February brought record snowfall to Massachusetts, transforming the Waltham apartment complex into a maze of plowed pathways between towering snowbanks. Thomas navigated these narrow passages carefully, balancing 2 grocery bags as he made his way home from the bus stop. His breath formed clouds in the frigid air, his fingers numbed despite his gloves. The job at Hendricks Construction wasn't what he had envisioned for himself at 53, assistant project manager, reporting to men 15 years his junior, but after 3 months of unemployment, He had embraced it with a gratitude that surprised even him. The steady paycheck, modest as it was, had restored something essential that had been missing: purpose. Inside the apartment, he found Diane at the kitchen table, a spread of papers before her, a familiar sight these days. She looked up as he entered, offering a tired smile. "You're home early," she remarked as he set down the groceries. "Pete let us go at 4. The site's frozen solid. Not much we can do until the temperature rises." Thomas began unpacking the bags. "Any word from Emma?" Diane nodded, holding up her phone. "She texted an hour ago. She got the internship." "The paid one?" "At Mercer Financial." Thomas paused, a carton of eggs in his hand. "Yes, she's ecstatic." There was genuine joy in Diane's voice. "It's exactly what she wanted: financial experience, decent pay, and it keeps her in Boston for the summer." Thomas felt a surge of pride and relief. "That's fantastic news. We should celebrate. She's coming for dinner tomorrow to tell us in person." Diane returned to her papers, what Thomas now recognized as student artwork she was grading. "Jack has a game at 6, so we'll need to eat early." Thomas put away the last of the groceries and poured himself a cup of coffee before joining Diane at the table. "How was your day?" "Good. Busy." She pushed a piece of artwork toward him, a vibrant watercolor painting with surprising sophistication for elementary school work. "Maria's getting really talented. I'm recommending her for the district art program." Thomas studied the painting, struck by the enthusiasm in Diane's voice when she spoke about her students. The full-time position at Watertown Elementary had been a necessity born of financial crisis, but it had also given Diane something unexpected: a renewed passion for teaching that had been dampened by years of part-time work. "You sound happy," he observed. Carefully, Diane glanced up, seeming surprised by the comment. "I am, I suppose. At work, at least." She gathered her papers into a neat stack. "The kids are amazing, and being department head gives me more input into the curriculum." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the kind that had once been common between them, but had become rare in recent months. The bankruptcy was finally settled, the legal nightmare largely behind them. Day by day, they were adjusting to their new circumstances, finding small victories where they could. "I'm going to shower before dinner," Thomas said, standing up. "I've got concrete dust everywhere." Diane nodded, already returning to her grading. As Thomas headed for the bathroom, his phone buzzed with an incoming text. It was from Jack. "Can you pick me up from practice? Bus is running late because of snow." Thomas texted back immediately, "On my way." 15 minutes later, freshly showered and changed, Thomas pulled up to Newton High in the used Honda Civic they had purchased after selling both of their previous vehicles. Jack was waiting outside the gym, basketball under his arm, duffel bag slung over his shoulder. He slid into the passenger seat, bringing with him a blast of cold air and the faint smell of sweat. "Thanks for coming," he said, buckling his seatbelt. "Coach kept us late working on zone defense." "No problem," Thomas replied, pulling away from the curb. "How was practice?" "Good. Really good, actually." There was a note of cautious excitement in Jack's voice. "Coach says I'm starting tomorrow." Thomas glanced at his son, surprised. "You earned your spot back?" "That's great, Jack." "Yeah, well." Jack shrugged, but couldn't hide his smile. "About time, right?" The casual admission was delivered without the bitterness that had characterized so many of their interactions since the family's financial collapse. Thomas recognized it for what it was: an olive branch, small but significant. "The UMass scout is coming back for the game," Jack continued. "And someone from Northeastern, too. Emma will be at dinner tomorrow," Thomas said. "We can all go to the game together afterward." Jack nodded, staring out at the snow-covered streets as they drove. "Have you seen the new house yet?" he asked suddenly. Thomas knew immediately which house he meant: their old home in Newton, sold months ago to a young tech executive and his family. "No," he answered honestly. "Haven't had a reason to drive by." "I have." Jack's voice was quieter now. "They painted it blue and put up one of those basketball hoops that adjusts for little kids." Thomas felt a pang of loss, thinking of the hoop he had installed for Jack when he was 12, regulation height, because Jack had insisted he didn't want any little kid accommodations. "Do you miss it?" Thomas asked. "The house." Jack considered this, his profile thoughtful in the dim light of the car. "Sometimes, but not as much as I thought I would." He turned to look at his father. "It's just a house, right? Not like it was our whole life." The mature perspective caught Thomas off guard. For months, He had been shouldering the guilt of having cost his family their home, their financial security, their place in the community they had known for years. To hear Jack, who had perhaps struggled the most with these changes, dismiss the physical loss so casually was both jarring and deeply relieving. "Right," Thomas agreed softly. "Not our whole life." They drove the rest of the way in comfortable silence. At the apartment, they found Diane preparing dinner, the small kitchen fragrant with the smell of roasting chicken. "Jack's starting tomorrow," Thomas announced as they hung up their coats. Diane turned from the stove, delight spreading across her face. "Jack, that's wonderful news." "It's just varsity basketball, Mom," Jack mumbled, though his pleased expression betrayed his attempt at nonchalance. "It's not just anything," Diane corrected, pulling him into a quick hug despite his half-hearted protests. "It's important to you, which makes it important to us." Over dinner, Jack elaborated on the upcoming game, his excitement gradually overcoming his teenage reserve as he described the opposing team's weaknesses and his own team's strategy. Thomas watched his son, animated, engaged, focused, and saw glimpses of the boy he had been before the financial crisis had forced him to grow up too quickly. Later, after Jack had retreated to his room to study and Diane had fallen asleep watching television, Thomas sat alone at the kitchen table with his laptop. He was working on a spreadsheet, a habit from his former life, but with a very different purpose now. This wasn't a company financial projection or a building project budget. It was a college cost calculator for Jack's potential options next year. Even with his new job and Diane's improved salary, the numbers were daunting. They had some money set aside from the house sale after the debts were settled, but not nearly enough for 4 years at a private university. State schools would be more manageable, especially with scholarships. Athletic scholarships would make an even bigger difference. Thomas closed the laptop with a sigh. Tomorrow's game suddenly felt weighted with more significance than just Jack's personal achievement. So much was riding on his performance, his potential, his future. It was a pressure no 17-year-old should have to bear. The gymnasium at Newton High School was packed for the championship game. Thomas, Diane, and Emma found seats in the bleachers just as the teams began their warm-up drills. Jack spotted them and gave a quick wave before returning to his pregame routine. "God, this brings back memories," Emma remarked, looking around at her former high school. "Feels like forever ago that I was here." 2 years is hardly forever," Diane replied with a smile. "A lot can change in 2 years," Emma said, her gaze drifting to the court where Jack was now practicing free throws. She had arrived for dinner full of excitement about her internship, proudly showing them the official offer letter with its Mercer financial letterhead. The position came with a stipend substantial enough to cover her summer expenses and contribute to her fall tuition. "Ryan's here," she added, waving to someone across the gym. "He's coming over." Thomas watched as the young man he'd met at Northeastern made his way through the crowded bleachers. Ryan greeted them warmly, shaking Thomas's hand and complimenting Diane on the dinner they'd shared earlier. "Jack looks focused," he commented, nodding toward the court. "Emma says he's back in the starting lineup." "As of tonight," Thomas confirmed. "Big moment for him." "Huge," Ryan agreed. "My brother played college ball at UMass." The Scouts look for consistency, but they also love a good comeback story. The conversation shifted to Ryan's own plans after graduation, a job offer from a consulting firm in Boston that he was considering. Thomas noticed the way Emma's expression brightened when Ryan spoke, the casual way their shoulders touched as they sat side by side on the crowded bleachers. There was an ease between them that suggested more than friendship, though neither had said anything explicitly during dinner. The buzzer sounded, calling the teams to their benches. Jack glanced up at them once more before huddling with his teammates. Thomas felt a familiar tightening in his chest, the mixture of pride and anxiety that came with watching his son compete. "He'll be great," Diane said quietly, reaching for Thomas's hand. "He always rises to the occasion." The simple gesture, her hand in his, caught Thomas by surprise. Physical affection between them had become rare in recent months, limited to the occasional brush of shoulders in the cramped kitchen or accidental contact when passing in the narrow hallway of their apartment. He squeezed her hand gently in response, not wanting to break the moment by commenting on it. The game began intensely, both teams playing aggressive defense. Jack started cautiously, making safe passes and setting up his teammates rather than taking shots himself. But as the first quarter progressed, his confidence visibly grew. He intercepted a pass, drove to the basket, and scored with a smooth layup that had the Newton crowd on their feet. "That's it, Jack," Thomas called, his voice lost among the cheers. By halftime, Newton led by 8 points, with Jack contributing 12 of those points along with 4 assists. As the teams headed to their locker rooms, Thomas noticed 2 men in the stands, one wearing a UMass jacket, the other in Northeastern gear, both watching Jack with obvious interest. "The scouts are definitely paying attention," Emma remarked, having noticed them too. "This could change everything for him," Diane said softly. "For all of us." Thomas understood what she meant. An athletic scholarship would remove the financial burden that had been weighing on all of them since they began discussing college options for Jack. But even more importantly, it would give Jack back something essential that had been lost in the past year: a sense of possibility, a future potential unconstrained by their current circumstances. The second half was even better than the first. Jack played with a confidence and precision that Thomas hadn't seen since before their financial troubles began. When the final buzzer sounded, Newton had won by 15 points, and Jack had scored a career-high 28 points. The crowd erupted, students rushing onto the court to celebrate with the team. Thomas, Diane, and Emma made their way down from the bleachers, waiting at the edge of the court while Jack was surrounded by congratulating teammates and classmates. "I'm going to find Ryan," Emma said. "We'll meet you outside Jack's locker room." Thomas nodded, watching as his daughter disappeared into the crowd. Beside him, Diane was beaming with pride, her eyes fixed on their son in the center of the celebration. "He did it," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "After everything, he actually did it." Thomas put his arm around her shoulders, and to his surprise, she leaned into him slightly. "He's stronger than we gave him credit for," he replied. "Both of them are." Later, after Jack had emerged from the locker room flushed with victory and confirmed that both scouts had spoken to him about potential scholarships, the Mitchell family headed home together. Emma and Jack bickering good-naturedly in the back seat like they used to, Diane quietly content beside Thomas in the front. It wasn't their old life. The apartment in Waltham would never have the spaciousness or comfort of their Newton house. Thomas's job at Hendricks Construction would never provide the status or financial rewards of owning the Mitchell Group. There were still tight budgets and difficult choices and lingering regrets. But as Thomas glanced in the rearview mirror at his children, both finding their way forward despite the obstacles he had inadvertently placed in their paths, and felt the occasional brush of Diane's hand against his when she reached for her phone or adjusted the heater, he recognized that they had salvaged something more important than financial security or social standing from the wreckage of the past year. They had found their way back to each other. Not perfectly, not completely, but enough to build on. Enough to move forward. And for now, that felt like the biggest victory of all.